Stevenson. I'm president of the American Foreign Service Association, and I am a longtime friend of Matt Palmer's. And nobody does a better job than Matt Palmer of making real what the Foreign Service does. And he sometimes calls his books love poems to the Foreign Service. But it's been one of my great efforts as AFSA president to start to make clear what we do and why it matters, right? But people don't really have any idea what we do, but you do when you read these books. So if you've got friends and relatives who think what you do is exotic but have no idea what it is, these make great gifts. This is what I just want to say. Moms who don't know what you do. So Matt not only kind of gets, like, I've been critical of him because I've really thought his female characters needed help and that he needed better love interest. And I'm happy to report that in Enemy of the Good, we have a Foreign Service woman as the hero. She's pretty great. And it's got a pretty good love interest that really runs through it. Not Thornbirds, but I'm saying, it's pretty good. And good prevails. I want you to know the Americans are on the right side. It's just, I won't spoil the ending, but anybody who's looking for a good fantasy where the evil, authoritarian human rights abusers are defeated and the good people win, this is your read. I want to do one little paragraph, though, for the Foreign Service. It's on page 64, because this is the other part of what Matt does that I just adore. The voice of what members say to us comes through in Matt's books like nobody's business. So if you go into page 64, that first full paragraph there, come along with me. The transition at the embassy was not nearly as smooth. The Department of State moved thousands of people around the world every year, many to strange and exotic locales. For all that practice, one would think the bureaucracy would be better at it. But as Kate's father had once said after getting caught up in a particularly infuriating tangle of red tape, every time you moved, it was as though the department were doing it for the first time. You mean you're bringing your family with you to post? You have a dog? The school year starts in September? It all seemed like a new experience for the personnel techs and admin specialists who must have, Kate knew, dealt with these same routine concerns 1,000 times. I know that resonated with everybody. Members say in our lunches that we have all the time, I love my job. I love my colleagues. But you'd think no one had ever moved before, and Nat captures that so beautifully in here. He's also a captivating and engaging speaker, so I'm going to, without further ado, turn the podium over to Matt Palmer, author of Enemy of the Good.
Thank you, Madam President. As always. Thank you to Barbara. Thank you to AFSA. AFSA has been amongst the strongest supporters that I had since I started doing this about 4 years, and I'm grateful for everything that the organization has done to help me get the word out about this. And thank you all for coming. It's always something of a unique experience for writers when they give bookshops we give book talks to walk into the room and look out and see people that they don't actually know. So thank you all, those of you who have not been to my house for dinner, for coming out to listen today. And I promise that I'm going to do what I can to make it worth your while. I'll prattle on for a little bit, and then what I really enjoy doing is answering questions, having a little bit of exchange, talking about the stuff that's of interest to you. And I'd like to begin by talking about what it is that I'm trying to do with this book, Enemy of the Good, that may be a little bit different from what I've tried to do with my earlier books. All of my earlier ones, this is book number 4, and they all feature FSO protagonists. This one, as Barbara noted, is my first to feature a female lead, and in part this was something of a challenge. My wife would be the first to tell you, Matt, you know nothing about women. And so as I've decided I wanted to do this, and I wanted to do this in part for the challenge of it, and I wanted to do it in part because I hadn't, and I wanted to do it in part for, I will acknowledge, crass commercial reasons. Women buy books, women read fiction, and you need to be able to target that as an audience if you're going to be able to sell books. So I'm hopeful that this is going to do something to kind of expand the reach. And then I sat down to do it with a blank screen in front of me. How do I approach this? And the advice that I chose to go with was that of George R.R. Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones series, and he was asked how it was that he wrote such strong and compelling female characters, and he gave an answer to this question that I thought was simply fabulous, which is, you know, I've always thought of women as people. And that's all that I needed. And so it's there. It's kind of an element, but her gender is not central to the story. What's central to the story is her position, her responsibilities as an FSO, and her worldview. And this is really kind of the nub, the core of the story, something that I've experienced in the course of my own career, something that I suspect very much you all have experienced as well. And I tried to give it a name for this story and to talk about it both overtly and kind of as subtext through a lot of what goes on here. It's this idea that I've called, when I've talked about this with some of my first and second tour officers, trying to get them to understand what we do for a living, values complexity, by which I mean that we, the United States of America, are very, very big, and we want many, many, many things. Sometimes these things fit nicely together. They reinforce each other. Sometimes they do not. And I have an experience that I would share with you from a couple of years ago. I was working on Southeast Asia, working on Cambodia amongst other countries, and we had this issue with some Uyghur refugees in Cambodia, and the Chinese wanted them, and we didn't want them repatriated to China because we were concerned about what the Chinese were going to do with them. And it became this kind of binary pull and push between the United States and China with the Cambodian government as to what was going to happen with the Uyghurs. And at the end of the day, the Cambodians decided they were going to send these Uyghurs back to China. And one, I think, of the reasons for that is that it was easy for the government of Cambodia to satisfy the Chinese, to give them what they wanted. They only wanted a handful of things, and they were all about China. Whereas we, the United States, we have a list of 200 or 300 things that we want from you, and we don't do an especially good job of prioritizing those things. Everything for us is hair on fire important. We want this, we want it urgently, we want it right now. So what I'd like to do to start is to read, if I may, just a short passage from the book, and I promise it won't be too long, because I'm hopeful that you will all read it on your own, but this is kind of central to what it was that I was trying to get at with this book. It's early on. My heroine, Kate Hollister, who is, just to give you a little background on her, second generation FSO. Dad was an FSO, former Soviet guy, married to a Kyrgyz woman, so she'd grown up mostly in and around the former Soviet space, in particular in Kyrgyzstan, which is really a place where she feels in many ways more at home than she does in the United States, which is a place she's visited but had never lived until she went to college. Her parents were killed in Kyrgyzstan in a car accident, and she believes they were murdered by the government because they were gadflies and supporters of democratic change. So she's been brought back to Kyrgyzstan after an incident in her first post in Havana that I will not belabor at this point, by the new ambassador, who happens to be her father's brother. This is her uncle. And yeah, I talked about the nepotism waiver, but only enough to make it, kind of realistic enough. I didn't have to go into all the details. And then she had to get approval from HR/OP. No, I didn't. I've actually written 4 novels about the U.S. government without using a single acronym, which is yet one of the areas in which I have descended into unreality in pursuit of story. But so Kate has shown up now in country. She's sitting there at dinner with the ambassador, her uncle, and he's explaining to her that one of the big priorities that they have here is they're trying to do a deal with this authoritarian government that would give us a 99-year lease on this Soviet-era air base in Kyrgyzstan as part of this great game competition between the United States and Russia and China in particular. And Kate, who's something of an idealist, has some concerns about this. And so she's at the dinner table in the residence, and she says to her uncle, she says, the base deal would come at a price, a steep price. And I'm afraid that we're falling victim again to short-termism. We have a clear vision for what we want this country to become: stable, free, prosperous, democratic, and allied to the West. But we want something from Air Aliyev right now, and we're prepared to mortgage that future in exchange for immediate gratification. It's not a recipe for long-term success in this region. I wouldn't use that frame, the ambassador suggested. What we struggle with, not only here in Kyrgyzstan, but everywhere in the world, is what I call, but I gave it to him, values complexity. A new term for me, I'll admit. My own coinage. The United States of America is an empire. Our interests span the globe, and our appetites are all but limitless. Every problem is our problem, and we want many, many things. Sometimes our interests are complementary. We want country X to buy American goods, so we hope it's rich enough to afford our airplanes and iPads. As it so happens, country X is also an American ally and a functioning democracy, so we want it politically stable. Prosperity supports both goals. Everyone wins. But sometimes our interests are contradictory. We support human rights and religious freedoms, but not if it means Saudi Arabia won't sell us oil or make nice to Israel. So we tend to downplay the whole freedom thing when we're kissing Al Saud's ring. We oppose human trafficking and forced labor, but we like cheap sneakers. Democracy is great, but what do we do when the public votes in leaders we find objectionable? Genocidal scumbags, for example, or fanatical jihadists. Life is complicated. In any given situation, there are hundreds of factors and dozens of values that we need to balance against each other. The process of finding that balance is what we call policymaking. It's what you and I do for a living on behalf of the American people, and it is an honor and a privilege to shoulder that responsibility. So that is kind of what this is about. It is our heroine, Kate, the idealist who wants to hold out for the perfect, and it is our realist ambassador, her uncle, who argues that you should never make the perfect the enemy of the good, which is what I kind of want to get at here, that the nature of what it is to compromise, the art of the possible. I was drawn to set this in Kyrgyzstan because of these kind of big picture geopolitical issues that are playing out in Central Asia that I wanted to balance against each other. The challenge for me is that this is not a region of the world that I know especially well, so I needed to do some research, and then I really wanted to get it right, or as right as I could. And so I did do a fair amount of research going into this, and I realized that maybe not all of that research was entirely necessary. As I was reading one of the early reviews of the book in a publication called Mystery Tribune, which is not the New York Times review of books, but it's not nothing. It's a real live publication, and it was a good review. It was a nice review. They said nice things, and among other things, they said, the reviewer said, Kyrgyzstan is a fictional country, but the author includes so many true-to-life elements that you could almost believe it was an actual place. And I'm thinking, if I was going to make this up, do you think I might have chosen a place that was easier to spell? That I might even have thrown a vowel in there. So, this is one of the challenges that I have writing about this stuff. I want it to be right, not entirely accurate, because that's not what this is, right? This is fiction. I think it was Jean Le Carré explained in an interview that he gave some years ago that I really quite liked, where he said that you don't want, in this writing, you don't want reality. The reader doesn't want reality. What they want is a facsimile of reality. They want a simulacrum of reality. It's got to be close, but it shouldn't be exact, because the real world doesn't fit neat narrative conventions, and you don't want to resist the narrative conventions. You want to embrace the narrative conventions and then use them in a jujitsu fashion to do that which you wish to accomplish with the readers. I'd like people to come away from reading these books having learned something about the country, the place, having learned something about us, right? That I do want to use these books to try and get out to the wider public, to the American audience. What is it that America's diplomatic corps does in the service of American interests? What it is that we do for the public. And I wanted for this one, which is maybe the most foreign service-y of the books that I've done, I was planning to dedicate it to the men and women of the Foreign Service. And then I made a tactical error, and I told my wife that I was going to do that. So the dedication instead is for Bekica. I pointed out that the first one was dedicated to her, and she said, "Well, yeah, me and the kids. I want my own." So, yes, this book is dedicated to my spouse, whom I love from here to the moon and back, but in invisible ink. It's to you all too. So I thought I would stop there and kind of open it up and chat about anything that is of interest to you, whether it's about this book, the process of writing, publishing, what it is, the themes that I'm trying to address in these novels, not just this one, but broadly the stuff that I'm writing about the State Department, the Foreign Service, about all of us, and have a little back and forth. And I'll begin with my dear friend Ruth Hall, who was in A100 with me 20 years ago.
I loved your very, very colorful attachés. Can you tell us a little bit about those characters?
Yeah. You know, you gotta have a villain. and I already
more than one.
I'd given the CIA a turn around the block. And so yes, one of the foils for our heroine is the defense attaché, who is an Air Force colonel, a F-15, F-22 driver, pilot. And I kind of make the point that this is a guy who is at the very pinnacle of the Air Force ziggurat, who has very little interest in the kind of nuance that Kate wishes to draw in terms of overall U.S. interests, U.S. equities, what our long-term relationship is going to be with this place. He has a very narrow focus. He has a single job, which is get agreement from the government on this base. And it's all he cares about. And to the extent that his focus is singular and all other interests are excluded, he's prepared to do just about anything in pursuit of that goal and objective. Even stuff that I think most Americans would find overtly immoral, reprehensible, problematic. And Kate is just as firmly convinced that her side is the right one. So this is black and white. This is friction, and what you get, and friction is kind of the essence of drama, right? It's where you create conflict. Is where you get tension. It's where you get story. It's where you get narrative drive. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who said that a scene without conflict isn't even a scene, right? It's not a thing. So Kate and our defense attaché are the ones who are right at loggerheads, and in between the two, there's a fair amount of fuzz and gray. Early on in the story, she is having a debate not dissimilar to the one that she has with her uncle, with the CIA station chief, who she believes is just as firmly on the wrong side of this issue as the defense attaché. That may or may not turn out to be true in the course of the story. And he is challenging her bona fides on the basis of her ties, close ties to Kyrgyzstan. That, she's got a Kyrgyz mother, she has these deep roots in the country. So as far as he's concerned, that calls into question her ultimate loyalties. Is she loyal to the United States? Or is she in some way going to be shading her judgments and her conclusions in favor of her affinity for this place in which she finds herself working? And Kate says to him, I don't see how knowing this country and having empathy for the people here can be a bad thing. Crespo leaned forward in his chair until his face was no more than 8 inches from Kate's. She could see the muscles in his jaw clenched tight, and there was a twitch at the corner of his eye, because
because sometimes, sweetie, you have to take your favorite dog out behind the barn and shit. So there's some tensions here, both about what's right in terms of policy and also about what are the markers of affinity, what are the markers of loyalty, what are the markers of association, and to what extent can you be in a place too long before it starts to call into question your fundamental values. You know, I've had this happen to me in the course of my career. I've spent a long time working on the Balkans, and an especially long period of time working in and around Serbia, married to a woman from Belgrade, and you know, the hosts tend to adopt in some ways the positions of their host governments, and sometimes it gets a little personal for people, and people will fight about it. And I've had that used against me in policy debates where, you know, people will accuse me of being too close to the Serb position because I'm too close to the place. And to which my rejoinder has been over the years, I say, you know, listen, from the very beginning of the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, I picked my side. I picked the United States of America. Who'd you pick? Right? That we can differentiate our professional responsibilities from personal affinity, personal affiliation, and then use those affinities to advantage U.S. interests. That's what Kate's trying to do. But she finds her loyalty called into question by someone who's, you know, being very deliberate in terms of how he's using that argument. All right, that was a really long answer.
They're interesting.
I didn't even remember the first question. I'm relying on you all to make this interesting. Ambassador.
So talk to us about using the epic poem of Kyrgyzstan.
Ah, yes.
I think this
Yes,
is so
that was
wonderful.
You know, I like cultural stuff, right? It's fun. It's what one of the things I really enjoy doing about this. So, you know, doing the research about Kyrgyz culture and trying to integrate as much of Kyrgyz culture into the story as I thought the narrative would bear. And so one of the elements that really kind of glues it together is this long, epic poem, the story of Manas, who's this Kyrgyz cultural hero, and you can't, I think, learn anything about Kyrgyzstan without incorporating at least some elements of this story into it. It is the equivalent of the Iliad and the Tale of Genji and the collected works of Shakespeare all kind of rolled up together. And it is from this story that some of the characters draw their nom de guerres to try and keep themselves under the radar of the government authorities. And it is a cultural touchstone for those in the opposition, for those in the government, for those from the outside who are trying to approach and understand this place. And one of the themes that runs through all the books that I've produced is outsiders trying to develop this understanding from the inside of the place in which they operate without losing their sense that they are something apart and separate. And it's a particular challenge for Kate because she does in many ways feel more at home in Bishkek than she does in Washington, which is something I think that we've all seen, you know, with our own kids too. They come back to the United States as teenagers, not having done anything here except spending the summer at grandma's, and being told, "Hey, you're an American," but feeling different, feeling somehow separate, somehow apart from the dynamics of this place. You know, America's a complex place, particularly for those who don't grow up here. It's a challenge for our kids. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your writing process and the extent to which you sort of map out your plots before you start writing, or the extent to which you sort of like let the characters kind of surprise you as you write it, and has that evolved over the course of your various books?
I have a pretty good sense of where it ends. I don't always know how it gets there, but you got to have, at least in my view, you've got to have a sense of what's the climax. What does this look like when all is said and done? So for me, when I write, the first third of a book is typically easy, the easiest, because I'm setting everything up. I'm establishing character. I'm building this kind of narrative. The last third of the book, I'm tying things together. I'm trying to work all these things back into this point that I know what it is. The middle third of the book is the hardest. The middle third of the book is where you need to maintain, again, this kind of narrative drive, this tension, as you put the protagonist deeper and deeper into the hole, and then also identify kind of the path forward that's ultimately going to take him or her out to, let's call it what it is, victory at the end of the story. So maintaining tension through the middle section of a book like this is always, I think, the most difficult thing. In terms of my...
It was good, Matt. It didn't slow.
It didn't slow?
No, I
It's
loved
good.
it. It was excellently
Yeah.
paced.
No, that's good, because that's the hardest thing.
The
You gotta
last
keep,
third, I couldn't put it down.
you gotta keep these things moving.
No, it was
and,
good.
and keep hitting the beats, keep people turning the page, because they want to know what happens, right? They want to know. You gotta take somebody that the reader cares about, that they relate to, that they have some feelings for, honest emotions for, and then put them in jeopardy. And that's the source of the kind of sweaty palm tension that keep people up at night turning the page, because they need to know not what happens in the story, but what happens to this person, even though they're not real, right? That you care about these people. The other thing that's very important to me in process, because I have a day job, it's hard. Is that I'm not precious about it, and I know I know a lot of writers, both very, very super successful writers and folks who are struggling at the beginning of career writers, and so I'm not at all precious about it. I know people that they can't write unless all of their pencils are sharpened and arranged on their desk, and they have a 4-hour block of free time, and everything's quiet, and they have this kind of hermetically sealed bubble in which they can think. I write sitting in seat 32J back in the plane by the toilets, with a sweaty fat guy on my left and a baby on my right, because that's when I can do it. And so I keep my muse on a chain, and when I get 20 minutes, I yank on the chain and say, sit down, muse. You got work to do, and just do it. And then the thing that I'm able to do that makes this all possible, which I wouldn't be able to do if I couldn't do this, is that I write very clean. So I've looked at the notebooks. I write longhand. I write with a pen and a piece of paper, largely because notepads don't have internet access, and you can't do anything but write or doodle. If you've got a piece of paper and a pen, all you can do is the thing you're supposed to do. And so I've gone back and I've looked at these notebooks in which I've written the first draft, and it's pretty close to what comes out as the final product. I don't need to do a lot of rewriting. And if I had to do big time rewrites, I don't think I could meet deadlines. The deadlines in this profession are brutal. The standard for if you're going to do this, and you're going to do commercial fiction, which is what this is a book a year.
Is it what?
It's a book a year.
Wow.
You have to be able to write a book a year, and that's hard.
Yeah, I am absolutely fascinated because obviously you're an active duty officer, you have a very responsible position. I mean, I remember when I was in active duty, 12, 14 hours days, weekends.
Huh?
I mean, how do you manage it? Can you expand a little bit?
Travel, I love travel. You're on airplanes, you're in airport lounges, you're stuck in some country for a weekend with no meetings, and I write. The other part is that whole sleep thing is overrated. It's.
Oh, wow.
So, I can do, if things are busy at work, I'm usually home. I usually get home before 7, most times, right? And so, have dinner, chat, and then I'll sit down about 9:30, right till 11. And then, you know, there's certainly plenty of times when I've fallen asleep in the living room. And there's the thing that I love, and this happens to me in meetings too. You know, if I'm note taking in meetings, which admittedly it's been a while since I've had to do, but when I was note taking in meetings, and you're tired because you've been, you know, like traveling with somebody and it's been a couple of days, and you'll get this thing where your notes will just going to drop down the page. And I look at it and it's like, God, this is gonna be a problem. And then, you know, I think we all have tricks to kind of keep ourselves awake in meetings, almost all of which involve in some way inflicting physical pain on yourself. This one's good for me, you know, I'm doing this thing. Other people like to bite the inside of their mouth. Whatever it is that, you know, unless you can get somebody from Med, Dr. Wellesby is here, to prescribe amphetamines. Let's talk that. Other things that are Doctor.
I have a question. Do you have to get any clearance, say, from the Department of State?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
No,
how extensive and painful is that?
well, it depends. I think they've rejiggered the FAM regs, but the way it used to be, it may still be this. If you're overseas, it's under Chief of Mission Authority, and that's relatively painless, right? So for my first two, I had asked the DCM to read them, and all they're looking for is classified information, right? That other than that, I should be able to write anything I want, right? And my excuse is, and I have to include a little disclaimer that none of this reflects, you know, the State Department's position, necessarily reflects the views of the State Department or the Foreign Service, and then, you know, my position is, it's a story. What that guy said, he's just a character. Yeah, he's an ass, but he's fictional, he's not real. But I can't do anything that's classified. So under Chief of Mission Authority was relatively simple. It becomes harder when you're in Washington and you have to submit it through Big PA to the Publications Review Board. And even that wouldn't be so awful, except that when there's stuff about other agencies, they'll farm it out to the other agencies. Now you've got a problem, right? So for this one, for example, I submitted it, what I thought was plenty of lead time, months for the review process, that I wasn't, like, you know, asking for something really unreasonable. And they sent it out to the CIA, because there's some CIA characters in here. And the CIA Publications Review people came back and said, yeah, we'll get to this. There's a little bit of a backlog. It could take a year.
No.
And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I can't wait. So I asked for some favors, right? And I talked to our folks in PA. I said, can you help me? Kind of just not get a yes, but get just action on it. I'll make whatever changes they want. None of the changes that they could desire would be material to the story. So I'll make whatever technical changes are necessary, but please, I need something in 6 weeks or 2 months rather than 12. And our folks in PA, I am indebted to them. They helped me out with that. In part because, you know, I think they saw it as being in the interest of the State Department that this stuff gets out. That it does, I'd like to think, help us as an institution, help the State Department, help the Foreign Service do this kind of outreach to the American public. What are we, and why should you care about us? And that's what I'd like to do, and I think that by and large, I think colleagues see the same value in this. So I would encourage everyone here to do the same, right? Whatever it is that you've got in terms of the ability to do outreach, do it, whether that's writing or speaking or whatever it may be. There is an appetite for this. People are interested in it. They're engaged by it. Give them something. Give them something to work with.
Matt, I love the cultural details of the recipes, the cooking, I mean, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
So did you try any of these fabulous foods that you described in this book?
In restaurants. Did I try and cook them myself? That wasn't going to end so well. You know, again, I want it.
beauty aspects were fun.
I want it to be close enough. I want it to be something that people reading feel that they can relate to. But I always also have to avoid the temptation not to overdo that. You know, one of the things that I found, for example, I've written now 4 books. One is the Congo, the second is India, Pakistan, the third is Bosnia, the fourth is this country I made up. Here you sound. Yeah. but the thing I found really kind of interesting about that is that I struggled with the book about Bosnia, which is the place that I know the best.
Interesting.
Because there's this temptation to include too much detail, too much background, too much nuance. You want to show off what you know. And you know the advice for writers to kill your darlings, that you know you're supposed to find the sentence in what you write in which you take the most pride and cut it out. Because it interferes with the flow. It's show-offy, and it's, hey, look at me, Ma, look how well I'm writing. And so, you know, I struggled with Bosnia because I know all this stuff and I want to put it on the page. And it bogs the narrative down. And so I'm constantly trying to weed out this stuff that's interesting to me. But I don't need to buy the book. And so, you know, you want to try and make sure that it's accessible. You want it to be, I want it to be smart and engaging without being off-putting or dense. You know, you want somebody reading this to feel like they're smart, and not that they're being either talked down to in any way or made to feel outside of the story. So it needs to be accessible, and it needs to be welcoming. And it's a hard kind of balance to strike, even as you want it to be, you know, real enough. One of the things I find with storytelling, as we look at our own jobs and how we go about doing our jobs, there's a lot of people that we interact with in the course of a day. A lot of people. Some of them are central to what we're doing. Some of them are tangential. You just can't have that many people in a story. It's too much to process. I personally, I won't read those books where you open it up and the very first thing is the list of characters, and it goes on for like 6 pages, and it's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm at the beach, right? So you kind of strip these. I kind of strip these processes down to where I'm only working with 20, 25 people, you know, through the course of the book. If you try and have much more than that, people are going to get lost, particularly if the names are foreign and a little bit difficult. And even when the names are foreign, you want to make them as accessible to the widest possible audience as you can. So when I was writing the Bosnia book, I was okay with having somebody named Zora, but not Žarko, for the reason that the Z in Zoran is pronounced like a Z, and the Z in Žarko is pronounced like a Ž. And why do you want to explain that to somebody? Do you want to have the little diacritical mark, or do you want them reading the whole thing and in their head mispronouncing the guy's name? So, you know, just make it easy for people. There's enough that's going to be hard and new and inaccessible that, you know, I feel like I owe it to people to make it as penetrable as possible. And so I try and hit a lot of the conventional notes in this kind of storytelling that people are used to. And as I do that, to set it in this context that is alien in terms of geography and a little bit alien in terms of professional experience as well. More stuff, I'm sure there's more.
I'm curious to know how you choose the title. How can you find a unique title with so many books in the world?
Yeah. One of the great things is that titles don't need to be unique. You
They
can't
don't.
copyright titles.
Oh,
You cannot. So I actually thought about naming this book Moby Dick. But decided that I would sell more copies with The Girl on the Train. There was a great story about this. There was There was a book, Paula Hawkins is the one that wrote this book, The Girl on the Train. There's another book called The Girl in the Train. Right? I'm going to turn to Kramer Books for affirmation on this point. I think
There's girls in lots of things.
there's girls in lots of things now.
A dragon
But
tattoo.
all of a sudden, The Girl in the Train had not been, kind of a huge success. But all of a sudden, after The Girl on the Train came out, they started selling a lot of copies. And of course, it was people buying stuff
Fluttering the wrong
by
way.
accident. But it's hard to return a Kindle. Once you've made that purchase. So I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to think through the title. This one I thought was obvious and a gimme, and I love this title. I love the title of the first book, The American Mission, which I thought was very kind of high concept. I had a working title for the Bosnia book that I really liked, which was One of Our Own, because it was kind of about someone from in the system who had gone bad, and the marketing people said, "You're giving away too much with the title, and no one's going to buy the book. They read the book when they read the title." The second one, Secrets of State, my original title for it was The Stoics, to which the marketing people said something along the lines of, "Are you out of your goddamn mind?"
Great tragedy.
Yeah. No. Under what section do you think we should file this? Dull. Please.
I haven't read your books, Mark, but I plan to now. But how do you go about setting the stage for a reader who knows nothing about diplomacy and may not have read your other books to immerse them into something that is so complex?
All right, here's the rule. And this is not true just for me, this is for everybody, for really all writing. And it's true, it's as true in writing a memo or a cable as it is in writing a novel, which is show, don't tell. It's like rule numbers 1 through 5 in how to do this. You want people to understand something about the character, and so when I start, the very first thing I start with always, the very first thing I start with all the time is the character. Who is this about? Because it's the character that people are gonna relate to. It's the character that's the point of entry into the story. And so you want them to learn something about the character from the initial interactions. And so I will give you an example of from the first one, from the American Mission, of how I did this with Alec Baines. And I wanted the reader to understand that this was a guy who was committed to doing what he thought was the right thing, and who was willing to look beyond the rules in doing, willing to bend the rules in pursuit of doing what's right. So I have him early on. He's in a consulate in Conakry working the visa line, and somebody comes in who's maybe marginally qualified for a visa, and he gives him the visa, and his superior calls him in and chews him out and says, I want you to cancel that guy's visa, but he ignores it and gives him the visa anyway. There's a little more tension in the story there than I've laid it out. But he was right, the supervisor was wrong, and he ignored instructions, and he did this thing that he shouldn't have done because it was the right thing to do. And I don't say anything about what his character is, about what his nature is. I don't say Alex was rigid or Alex was willing to challenge authority. I have a scene in which he's challenging authority. And so the reader has learned something about this guy, and through that action, something about the way the Foreign Service works. You don't have to tell them. I showed them this thing. And then as I'm laying out the thing, they're learning something about that world. And you do it, little pieces at a time. And only the bits that help advance the story. Every word has to earn its place. Every scene has to merit inclusion. And the goal is not to be didactic. The learning bit is secondary. To the extent that people learn stuff, I'm happy. It's great. It's entertainment. appealing, and the learning stuff is a little cherry on top.
How did you come up with a successful formula for your publications? Were there any drafts that you kept at home that didn't go anywhere, that were not published?
There were ideas, things I started that never really took off. I don't have any finished, unpublished manuscripts. My father was a novelist, and my brother's a novelist. This is kind of the family business. I grew up with this in the family. And I remember when I was very young, I guess junior high school, maybe late elementary school, junior high school, when my father started doing this. And he did it because he had gone to school with Robin Cook. And Robin Cook published Coma. And he's thinking, he and I have exactly the same education. And if Robin can do this, I can do this, right? So he sat down to do it, and he wrote a book. And the book he wrote was built off something that happened to him when he was in an emergency. He was an emergency room doctor, and this old woman came into him and dying, and the very last thing she said to him is the key. She says, "You've got to take care of the key." And she had a key taped to her wrist, and she died. She never told anybody what the key was for. She didn't have any next of kin. So that was kind of the thing that he built off for this story, and then. So he wrote this book, and he called a friend who was a novelist, a successful novelist. And by friend, I mean a guy he went to high school with that he hadn't talked to in 15 years. And he called him up and says, "Hey, Jimmy, it's Michael Palmer. Guess what?" And Jimmy said, "You wrote a book." And Pop said, "Yeah, isn't that great?" and Jimmy said, "All right, here's the deal." He said, "I liked you in high school." He says, I'll read your book on 2 conditions. The first is that I'm going to tell you if it's bad. And the second is, it's bad. and so he sent the book, and Jimmy read it, God bless him, and he called me and said, it's bad. But, he says, you understand drama, and we can teach you how to write, but we can't teach you to have a sense of story and drama. So, let me put you in touch with an agent, and they did this, and they said, this book that you have here, Michael, is unpublishable. Give us some other ideas. And so we gave him a list of ideas, and on the basis of that, he started this career. And so that first manuscript has only ever been published in Swedish. Because for some reason he got really big in Sweden. And they would publish anything that he had, like laundry lists, whatever. And they had this. And it was just Sweden, so what the heck? So the Corey prescriptions, that first one, is out there only in Swedish. So the first one that I wrote, I was able to get.
What about the key, Matt? What about the key? What was it for?
I don't remember what happened.
We have to go read it in
Something
Swedish.
So for me, the first manuscript I finished, I was able to sell, but that's unusual. Most writers have some complete and unpublishable manuscript in a desk drawer somewhere. So if you're writing, or if there's people in your family that are writing, keep at it. And if it doesn't work the first time, keep doing it. Eventually, you'll hit the right thing.
Thank you.
I had noticed, or in particular, the role of the American school in the character development, their relationships, and the plot. And wonder if any of that's, I have my own experience with my kids from American schools and ties they've had that have led them in a strange way, whether that's just made up or, any experience that helped to add to that.
Well, I think we've all seen abroad the way that the school serves as a frame for relationships, right? That particularly for folks with kids, these are the people who are going to be important to you in establishing a kind of social network in an overseas posting. Most of my friends overseas that aren't professional contacts, the friends are the parents of my kids' friends, right? That these are derivative relationships. I like them, I enjoy them, but the sorting process is often through through the schools. For this particular book, for Enemy of the Good, the school is a device. It actually is a character in the story in a very clear and compelling way. When our heroine is called in to see the ambassador on the first day, and he says to her, listen, there's this underground democracy movement bubbling right beneath the surface in this place, and they won't talk to us because they don't trust us. But I think they're going to trust you, because we think there are people in this movement that you went to high school with when she was at that international school in Bishkek some years ago. And it becomes clear to her, to Kate, that she's been brought to this embassy, at least in part, because of these relationships, and that the ambassador wants to leverage those relationships to establish contact with this democracy movement. And the question becomes, well, where is Mike? Right? Why does he want to do this? And that's, I don't want to get into that too deeply, but it's her high school era relationships that are part of the drivers of the story in Enemy of the Good. So the school is an important aspect of the story. It's an important character in the story in a lot of ways. I think we have time for one last question. If there's one more, I would be more than happy to take it.
I know the key here is for us to buy and read your books, but are there any other authors out there who you feel who get the Foreign Service and who do fictional Foreign Service well?
The only other person I know who's doing kind of mainstream stuff about the Foreign Service is Todd Moss, who was a DAS in AF, who was a political appointee. So his protagonist, a guy named Judd Riker, is a political appointee, social scientist who heads up an office that looks a lot like CSO. Do we still call it CSO? We've given it another name now.
Still CSO.
It's still CSO? Yes, all right. Who is dragged into all of these crises around the world with these theories of the golden hour when there's a coup, that the first 3 days are important in determining what the shape of that coup is going to be. So he integrates kind of social science in with diplomacy, and his perspective is a little different than mine. It's a little less Foreign Service oriented and a little more diplomacy oriented. I once, just as a brief aside, I once got into a fight with my boss, which I advise you against. But I was Mort Halpern, who was the head of policy planning. And Mort, you can always kind of, he's a good guy. You can always kind of just intellectually fight with him. And I can't remember what we were disagreeing about. And he said to me, the problem with you FSOs, he says, is that you think foreign policy is a profession. And I said to him, no, Mort, that's not right. I said, any amateur can do foreign policy. Diplomacy is a profession. And so, Todd and I are friends, and we do a lot of stuff together. And we're both doing the same universe, but from slightly different perspectives. That said, let me thank you all for coming. I'm grateful. Thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you for everything you will do for the State Department, for the Foreign Service, for the United States. And thank you all for coming out today.
Thank you.